From your local election headquarters, this is Big Country Politics on KTAB.
All right, welcome back to Big Country Politics. Joining us, our good friend Dr. Fabrizio from McMurray University, professor of political science. It is what a time to be alive. Calls for an impeachment investigation right now with President Trump.
Amazing, isn't it?
Yes.
You know, I remember in grad school, everybody said impeachment will never happen. If you get close to it, the president would just resign. Since then, Bill Clinton was impeached but not convicted, and now we're 25 years later, we're going to go through the same thing again. President Trump is under an investigation for impeachment. And if you look at the votes right now among the Democrats in the House of Representatives, there's probably enough votes to impeach him. But then it would go to the Senate, and there's no conviction.
And the Republicans have it there.
The Republicans control the Senate, so therefore they would not impeach it. But the Democrats, and I hope I said that right.
Yeah.
The Democrats in the House have enough votes to impeach him, but there is not enough in the Senate to convict him.
So I think there is a big misconception that the word impeach means that he's literally ousted from office. That is not true, right?
Exactly. That is not true. Impeachment means that the House of Representatives says the president did something wrong. The Constitution says high crimes and misdemeanors, but there's no definition of what that is. So basically, it's up to the House to say, did the president do something wrong? When they come up with that, if they do, then it goes to the Senate, and the Senate then makes a political decision whether to kick the president out of office, to overturn a national election. And that's a big deal.
Wow. So like you said, back with President Bill Clinton, he was impeached but not convicted.
Correct.
So they said he did something wrong.
They said he did something wrong. And then the Senate said, sorry, it's not serious enough to throw him out of office. We've never thrown a president out of office. We need to remember Andrew Johnson, after the Civil War, he was impeached but not convicted. And then Bill Clinton, same thing, impeached but not convicted. The only one who would have been impeached and convicted was Richard Nixon, and he stepped away from it. He resigned before it actually took place.
Before we talk kind of about what exactly is happening, is the world looking at us right now and saying, is he going to be impeached? You know, whenever I went to Europe a couple of years ago, everyone was asking me, what do you think about President Trump? Is the world watching us right now again?
I think they are. You need to remember the president just this week was at the United Nations giving a speech, a very nativist, populist kind of speech, and he had everybody's attention. So I think that will continue. The reality is that we as Americans don't pay too much attention to the rest of the world, but the rest of the world pays a lot of attention to us simply because of our economic strength, our cultural strength, and our military strength. They have to deal with us, whether they like to or not.
All eyes are on us at all the time.
Yes.
All right, so let's go back to the allegations. So July 25th, this phone call happens between President Trump and the president of the Ukraine, right?
Yes.
All right, so between that call, there's a whistleblower.
Yes.
All right, so what is this whistleblower alleging happened during this phone call?
In the end, the whistleblower is saying that, and it's more than just the phone call, it's other actions too, that the president basically asked for help in his re-election bid from the president of the Ukraine. And you need to understand, under American law, you cannot get foreign help in an election. It's illegal. You can't do it. And so you read what the White House released, the semi-transcripts, if you will. It really seems as if the president asked the president of the Ukraine for him to investigate Joe Biden specifically, and Joe Biden's son, Hunter, who was on the board of a conglomeration in the Ukraine. And the whole idea was to root out corruption, to see if there was anything bad that was taking place. You know, in one sense, that's absolutely fine, except that Joe Biden is running against the president. And go back to July 25th, Joe Biden was the front runner for the Democrat nomination. So therefore, you have the president asking for political dirt on his opponent. And again, in other circumstances, that would be fine. You know, the president can hire an opposition research firm in the United States that would do that. But you don't ask a foreign leader. That is a violation of the law. And so that's really what triggered this whole thing. But then there was subsequent questions about how the call was handled, the way the White House took care of it, the fact that there's other allegations that took place at the same time, like the president was withholding aid to the Ukraine. And was the president doing it for a quid pro quo? Okay? Those Latin words basically mean I scratch your back, you scratch mine, or in a negative way, it's bribery. You do something for me, I'll do something for you. And so was the president putting his personal re-election above the national interest? And so that's what this whole thing is about.
And the whistleblower also alleging that the White House does not want the transcript released of this call.
Yeah, and that apparently was the case for a period of time, except we've got the notes of it, so it's almost a transcript, it's not quite. But what's interesting is that transcripts of these calls between leaders are so seldom released.
Okay.
So the idea that they would hold one secret is in keeping with past practice. And apparently the president of Ukraine did not know that the United States was going to release the notes of the conversation until it was actually released. And did he want his conversation with President Trump to be released?
Okay.
So.
Right. Let's talk timeline real quick before we go to break. So right now, we're recording on Thursday, so House lawmakers are hearing from the intelligence chief right now.
Yes.
So what is the timeline of what could happen?
Are we talking about in the past or in the future?
In the future, like,
okay.
You know, if he gets impeached, how soon could that happen?
Okay.
Or the vote for that could happen?
Okay. That's a $64,000 question. In other words, really nobody knows. The idea of the impeachment vote taking place like in the next couple of weeks is unlikely. Most likely, if it's to happen, it will happen the end of this year, November, December. At worst, it would happen in January. There is a deadline, and this really stares in the face of all the Democrats, and that is that the first votes in the Iowa caucus for the 2020 presidential election occur right after Super Bowl Sunday. So, first week in February, voting starts for the 2020 presidential election. The Democratic candidates want this whole thing disposed of by then. The Democrats in the House also want it disposed of by then. The only question is, can they get organized enough to actually make it happen? And if there is going to be a vote in favor of impeachment, then you still have to have a trial. And that trial can take a couple of weeks to a couple months. So when is that going to take place? And then, of course, in a year, we re-elect the president or not.
Pretty close, yeah. So were you surprised when you saw Nancy Pelosi step up and call for this?
She has been under tremendous pressure for a long, long time. And she's fended it off, I think, really, really well. But the press of events with the Ukraine thing and the whistleblower complaint, I think, just forced her to actually say, okay, we're going to do it.
All right, there are a lot of other issues, and we're going to talk more of those, perhaps around the border. We'll be right back right here on Big Country Politics.